We're all set.
Good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, June 22nd, 2023. This is a special Darien Board of Education Finance Committee meeting. It's just after 8:35, and we're going to get to our agenda, but just want to congratulate the grads. I don't want to steal Duke's thunder and your thunder from Tuesday, but that was a most epic graduation ceremony, even though it had to be moved inside. I think it was so memorable in so many ways. So, and congrats to the girls across team, #1 in the country. Pretty awesome. I'll let Duke go further with that. So our first agenda is the review of May 2023 financial report. And Rich, if you could also hit the grants and the school lunch program and just bang that all through, and then we'll talk about the transfers. Thanks.
So this is the financial report through May. We are forecasting a positive balance of $799,861. The change from the prior month is just over $26,000. To highlight those changes, there was a $64,000 transfer that was approved at the last Board of Ed meeting outside of the typical financial report for the playground move from Oxbridge to Hindley. We did see some slight savings in dental insurance for $31,744 as dental claims improved the last couple of months. A reduction of just over $5,300 in salary savings due to some revised start dates for some non-certified staff. We are forecasting a deficit in legal fees for special education of $15,000 and then $15,000 deficit again in legal fees, but for the district, excuse me. We are getting to that time of the year where we're pretty close to winding down. So we are seeing some savings in utilities, both heat and electricity, of just over $23,000. And that relates largely to consumption. Tuition reimbursement, we are obligated to set aside $50,000 for the DEA contract for tuition reimbursement. And it looks like it'll come in about $8,000 under budget. And again, as we're getting close to the end of the year, some of the various smaller operating accounts such as consumables, travel, classroom reference, professional library purchase show about $833 under budget. Medicaid revenue continues to improve at just under $5,000. We did get a couple more building and field rentals generating $4,200 in additional revenue, and then a small savings in art equipment for $25. So in total, as I mentioned, $799,861. The general education RCs make up $111,652 of that, and the special education RCs forecast a positive $688,209. Just to kind of go over some of the items in individual RCs, Fitch does have a small amount in savings from local travel. You'll see small amounts in RC3 for textbook replacement and dues fees, just over $6. Hindley, textbooks and consumables of about $20. In Oxbridge, a small amount in classroom reference, same thing with Royal in terms of office supplies, and then Tokenique textbook replacement consumables. This is kind of the time of the year, as I mentioned, where we start to see that. RC12, as I mentioned, we are seeing a little bit more money in our building and field rentals. We saw a little bit of an uptick in building rentals. So before it was about $30,000 to the deficit, it's now about $28,000. Music, software, and consumables, a positive $7, and then some small amount of money in art in terms of software, classroom reference, and professional development of $185. As I mentioned earlier, we are forecasting a deficit in legal fees for the district for $15,000, and that is due to some non-renewals of staff. Tuition reimbursement in RC18 is under budget by $8,150. Tech Ed has a small amount of savings of $97 in those various operating accounts. In RC24, special education legal fees are forecasted at a deficit of $15,000 as well. In RC25, electric is showing a favorable balance of just over $20,000. This consumption has trended downward. We haven't had that much in terms of a hot spring and summer, so we did consume a little bit less in electricity. Just to move forward to the grants real quickly, no new grants to report. I will say the special education stipend has been expended in June. The CT SEDS implementation as well has been expended in June. We are still carrying that balance of just over $88,000 in the ARP ESSER fund. That does have to be expended by the end of next fiscal year. So we have one more year to expend that $88,000. And then just looking at the food service fund, we had another strong month. We have a profit of just over $222,000. And we are forecasting a year-end surplus of $213,000. June typically isn't a positive month because we only have about half a month in that year, in that month. And then we're anticipating the fund balance to be about $551,000. So overall, the food service fund performed very well again.
I got some questions, but
Go ahead.
okay. So let's just go to the grant. So 88,000 is kind of the one. I know you mentioned that we carry over similar amount the IDEA grant, but there's an incremental 88,000 that's kind of one time that we look to extinguish next year, and that's
So
it.
the 88,000 is for the ESSER grant. So
Okay.
it's a separate grant. This was the funds that the federal government gave all the states during COVID.
Yep.
So we do have $88,000 left. One of the discussion points was whether or not we have a wellness coordinator at the high school. So that's still up in the air. If we end up going forward with that, that'll draw down on a portion of that 88,000. We don't go forward with that, we'll have to revise the grant to essentially use that for something.
Okay.
It does have to be either used for wellness and safety. It can be used for building conditions, technology, security. Those are really kind of like the buckets that you can use.
We're not worried about carrying over balance till it expires is basically. What
No, we do have to expend it by June 30th of next year.
Okay.
Otherwise we have to return.
Okay, perfect.
Dr. Dad will be, Dr. Dad will be presenting on recommendations for the high school and middle school on Tuesday evening. So we'll actually talk about
Okay.
that on Tuesday evening.
RC12, you just noted a slight uptick in rentals. Is this going to be recurring into next year, or is it?
No, I mean, so part of it is per person. And so we just had more people
Oh,
doing
okay.
some inside of the building activities. And so we got a couple $1,000s more than we anticipated.
And then I just wanted to also highlight, there's a significant difference in the surplus between the special education RCs and the general education RCs. But just to remind folks, we did do pre-purchases out of the general ed RCs. And more recently, we've been doing transfers, including the playground and.
So the bulk of the special education is really excess cost related,
Yeah.
$734,000 to the positive. The reason it's slightly less is ELP tuition did come in under anticipation. So that's how you get to that 688.
Legal fees too, does that come out of that?
So it's ELP, so it's
Yeah.
RC 24 and 26
Yeah.
come into the special education.
Okay, so not the special education legal fees. Then.
No, so that is that's within the 688.
Oh,
So
okay.
really you have three things. You have the positive 734 for excess costs, the negative $15,000 for legal fees, and about a little more than $30,000 of less revenue than anticipated in the ELP.
Again, it's one pool, but I do like how we account for this and use the general education
This is a
RCs.
question about the legal fees, the special ed legal fees. Do you anticipate that will be okay for what we budgeted for this upcoming fiscal year? Or do you think we'll run into an issue again?
This is the first year, at least since I've been here, that we've had an issue. It really depends on how long mediations take, how complicated they are. We did have a couple that were longer than anticipated in Shirley's office, and so that's really kind of what's driven it. And since we're kind of at the end of the year, it would be good to have that little bit of cushion, so in case we have that bit of a spike.
Danny, you have any questions? Oh, sorry.
No,
Katie,
no
go ahead.
questions. Pretty clear.
Either or, go ahead.
I just had one question, coming back to the ESSER grant. Just the note here says that it's about supporting learning loss. So I was just curious about those other buckets that you mentioned, like the wellness coordinator. Those are defined by the state as well.
So there's essentially four categories. One of it was learning loss. So when the ESSER grants came out for COVID, it was also about ensuring buildings were safe and secure, air quality was good, safety and security for students were good. Part of that, what we initially used it for was an additional campus monitor when it first came out, and that was to help the kids like space out. Technology, because a lot of people were doing either hybrid or remote learning, so you can use things for technology. So those were the broad buckets that the state allowed.
And I know you've mentioned that Alicia was going to bring some ideas forward at the next meeting. Are there other considerations for that, or are we kind of committed to that being spent in a wellness area?
So you're not committed to it at all yet. So the only thing you're committed to is having to spend it by June 30th of 2024, and you're committed to only having $88,000 available. So during the budget season, the recommendation was for it to be a wellness coordinator. And one of the recommendations of the board was to kind of pause until Alicia got here. So whether or not you end up choosing the wellness coordinator, or you choose technology, or some mixture of both remains to be seen.
Do me a favor, pull your mic closer too. All right, Danny, you're good. Okay, so if we could just move over to the transfers then.
So there are two recommended transfers for this month. The first is for $15,000 into district legal fees. We are recommending taking from electricity, the savings from electricity. And then the second one is for $15,000 in special education legal fees. And we are recommending taking $15,000 from the health insurance account, largely accrued from dental and census savings.
Okay, so that goes back to my question earlier. Why wouldn't you take it out of the special ed RC?
So really the only bulk of the money that we have in terms of savings is from excess cost related revenue. I didn't really want to touch the excess cost related revenue. And you also can't actually file for reimbursement for legal fees. It's not really a service for students. So I kind of wanted to keep the excess cost pretty separate.
Great answer. Thank you. I appreciate that. Danny, any questions?
No, I had the same question with you with that legal fees for special ed. So thank you.
Okay, so just consensus would bring this to the board with a recommendation to approve the transfers.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Perfect.
And just a reminder, we don't bring another one forward till September for
Financial report.
Brendan.
for the
I'm
end of
sorry.
the year report, end of year financials come
Oh,
in
yeah.
September. Just a reminder.
I mean, we're halfway through the month. Is this number going to stay pretty stable?
It should stay pretty stable. Our last payroll goes out tomorrow. There were no real significant surprises. We'll probably accrue some more savings in those smaller accounts as we start to disencumber items. But there really are no anticipated surprises. So just in terms of how the year-end process works out, all the purchasing basically stops on June 30th. And then we have a couple months where we have to make some accrual entries. And, a good example is we consume electricity on June 30th, but we don't actually get billed for that electricity on June 30th. So it takes a while to get those bills in and book them back. But I don't expect any significant changes between now and when we bring the financial report for the final year.
Well, it was a great budget year, so we'll thank you in September, I guess. Okay, so we're gonna now go to the third item, discussion on participation fees. I guess I wanted to have a quick moment to kind of frame this discussion, and Alan, hand it to you and Chris and Rich. But the memo, as dated June 22nd, part of our meeting packet, said the discussion of participation fees was set for a preliminary, I will put stars and asterisks, discussion at the June Financial Committee meeting with further discussion at the summer retreat. So the way I'd love to handle today's discussion is basically having Chris, Rich, Alan walk us through the memo, ask clarifying questions about the information presented in the memo, but really come out with no conclusions, but a better understanding of what the options are going forward, because this is part of such a larger subject matter that the board has identified, but not yet clarified in terms of exactly how we want to frame the discussion at the board level and what we want to prioritize and maybe move aside. And I actually think participation fees kind of comes out as a byproduct of a lot of the discussion that we're going to have at the board level in terms of prioritizing that broader discussion. So if that's okay with everybody. Again, with that asterisk, again, this is preliminary. Nothing is set in stone. It's just a better understanding of how other districts do it and what we currently do. If we could kind of frame that discussion that way, it'd be great.
It's a little bit like analogous to the department chair discussion that came through the curriculum committee, and then it's going to the board then on July 19th. I want to thank Rich for doing all the research in this, and also Mr. Manfredonium. So we put in here, included some club information, the idea of like the participation being separate from the other discussion about fees and club fees and so on and so forth, and how much people pay. It can be seen separate, or it can be seen combined. So there's information, supplementary information here just for contextual background that at some point will be brought up. So I'll ask Rich just to walk through the memo. We put in some guiding questions that I think invariably the board's going to have to answer. Do you want to do X, Y, and Z? Or do you want to consider what's your answers to these particular questions? And hopefully down the line, it'll lead to a consensus of the board at some point, sort of moving forward with this, and also the whole athletics discussion that we'll be having at the board retreat. So with that, Rich, we can just walk through this and
Right.
talk on the main points.
So we did reach out to some of our peer districts throughout Fairfield County. It's kind of a mixed bag in terms of who have participation fees or not. So the DERG is split. So currently we do not, New Canaan does not, Westport does not, Weston does, Wilton does, and Ridgefield does. So Ridgefield currently is the high at 200 per sport. They used to be 225 and they're reducing it to 200. The low is Weston and Bethel at 100. Typically, districts will charge more for high cost sports such as ice hockey. So New Canaan charges $550 for ice hockey, Trumbull $365, Newtown $250. In districts such as Westport, New Canaan, Wilton, Weston, they either have subsidies from the Booster Club or they're in co-ops, and so the costs are split amongst districts. Really, the driving cost of ice hockey is the cost of the rink, the ice rink, and it's very expensive, and there's only so many in the area that you can go to. My understanding from Chris is that we do practice a lot more for ice hockey than some of our peer districts, which is why some of our rental costs are a lot more. So obviously, the more you use the ice hockey rink, the more you're going to have to pay. Some districts like New Canaan, for example, they do not fund any non-CIAC, FCIC sports. So while they participate in CIC, non-CIAC, FCIC sports, it's funded outside of the general board's budget. So for Darien, that would include rugby, sailing, skiing, and squash. So any district that has participation fees, they all have like waivers for economic hardship. So typically the trend line is whether or not you're free and reduced. So if you're free, you will have your fee waived. If you're reduced, it's typically 30% of whatever the fee is, what you end up paying. And so then the district kind of absorbs those costs in those districts. We did put together a little chart in terms of what you see other districts doing. As I mentioned, Ridgefield's at 200, Weston's 100, Wilton's 125, Newtown 160, Bethel 100, Trumbull 160, New Fairfield 150, and Monroe 250. Some districts choose to have what's called a family cap. And so a family cap could be, let's say you have two children, they're both student athletes, they both play, let's say 3 sports each. So if you're charging $200 and they both play and there's no family cap, you can pay $1,200, but let's say there's a family cap of 1,000, that last 200 gets waived. So no family pays more than whatever that family cap is. So if you have 2 kids or 3 kids or 4 kids and they're all student athletes, that's a decision that some districts have. So Ridgefield, for example, and Wilton, for example, do not have a family cap, whereas Weston and Newtown, Bethel, Trumbull, and Monroe do have a family cap. So looking at potential options for participation fees in terms of how some districts do it, the most common practice is a flat participation fee for any sport that student plays. So if you play a flat $200 and you pay 3 sports, you pay $600. And then some of the districts, as I mentioned, do have a family cap. So the more sports you pay, the more the fee is. A second option could be a flat dollar amount for each sport, similar to option 1, but a higher fee for those non-CIC, FCIC sports. So again, rugby, sailing, skiing, and squash. So in the Excel spreadsheets that we forwarded, if the fee, let's say, as an example, was $200, you could set a fee for those non-CIC sports, let's say at $400. And that's because they're non-CIC, FCIC sports. A third option, which no district in Fairfield County, to our knowledge, has, is a varying fee based on a flat percentage of the total budget cost per sport. And so that's kind of similar to what we do with the rental costs for those sports now, like ice hockey, skiing, and squash. You could do the inverse of what we do for that. So right now we have a 70-30 split. You could do the inverse where everybody pays 30% of whatever the total cost is. And so then in some instances, you might have a higher fee for certain sports, a lower fee for other sports, and because it really depends on how much that total cost is. So then looking at rental fees, typically rental fees throughout Fairfield County are primarily in the area of ice hockey. Darien doesn't have a swimming pool, so in those other districts that do have a swimming pool, rental fees aren't really an issue. So currently we have a 70-30 split, as I mentioned.
70 being
The parent.
parent.
And 30 for the board, correct. So an option 2 could be you keep the 70-30, but for non-CIC, FCIC sports, You could do 100, 0, so 100 to the parent, 0 to the board. You could create a option 3, which is a flat rental fee for CIC, FCIC sports, and then retain the 70-30 split for those non-CIC, FCIC sports. This obviously would increase the share of expenses for the Board of Ed for things like ice hockey. Option 4 is you could create a flat rental fee in addition to the participation fee, and then the rental fee is 100%. Again, this would increase costs to the board. So questions in terms of whether or not you kind of want to go down that road of participation fees is, one, obviously the first question is, do you want to have a participation fee? 2, if you do want to implement a mandatory participation fee, which option do you want? And obviously what's the price you want to set? Option 3, would be, or excuse me, another consideration is if you have mandatory fees, do you want to have a family cap or no family cap? So obviously some districts have a family cap and some don't. If you do implement the mandatory participation fee, do you want to have a different fee for those non-FCIC, CIC sports, or do you want it to be the same across the board? Do you still want to have rental fees if you have a mandatory fee? So the rental fee in addition to the mandatory fee. If you do have a rental fee, what format do you want it to be? Do you want to continue with the 70-30? Do you want to have a different fee for those non-CIC sports? Do you want it to be a flat dollar amount? And then 7 really is, so currently the district does have what's called voluntary fees. And so they'll issue voluntary fees out to a number of sports. Typically about 90% of the population pays those voluntary, and they pay for those nice to haves that aren't supported. So it could be like huddle is a good example. The alternate game jerseys are a good example. So not all the sports have voluntary fees, but there's a number that do. And we did include a voluntary sport fee. An option could be that if you do set a mandatory fee, you could true that mandatory fee up and have a portion of that mandatory fee go to those nice to haves, and then kind of put all those nice to haves in the operating budget and essentially set a cap for what you're going to have on the nice to fee. So if you set $200 as your mandatory fee, you could do $300, and $100 gets kind of siphoned off into the budget to cover those nice to haves, and that's your cap on what you can have. But then at that point, you're also limiting fundraising for the community for whatever sports that they are. I don't know if we want to stop, or do we want to go to clubs and
So you
councils,
said
or-
district fee, but it's really the teams that are these voluntary fees. It's really the teams that are doing. It's not a district fee. I
Correct. No,
just
they're
want to make sure.
voluntary. Yeah, voluntary. fees.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think let's stop there. And again, like, this is awesome information to help inform us for further discussion. And I really appreciate you putting it together. It kind of clearly is going to raise some more questions, but anybody have, but again, in the context of the information that is being presented in this memo, or information that you think is missing from this memo that we should include, anybody have any questions?
So I think my first comment is that I think we need to solve for, what are we trying to solve for? And what are these fees being used to either supplant and add to? Just what is the purpose of this process? My more specific question is, in your research, did you find the fees that the districts charge, the mandatory fees, participation fees, pardon me? Do you know what those are used for? Or is that used just to offset budget, or are they used for the
So
nice?
it's just a revenue source to
It's a
offset the
revenue source.
cost.
Okay. So those districts still have the voluntary parent.
So some don't do
Donations.
voluntary fees at all. Some districts do voluntary fees. It's kind of like a mixed bag.
I can tell you firsthand that there are a number of districts who still have the voluntary fees on top of the mandatory participation fees.
And or fundraising, I'm sure too.
And or fundraising, right?
And-
There's still things that need to be covered that the Board of Ed wouldn't cover for, homecoming things or for senior night things. So the Board of Ed wouldn't cover those costs, but so that's passed on. to the
Are
parents.
there any districts that assume 100% of the cost of sports?
In terms of those,
Not for like the nice to have.
no,
Okay.
not those, no, those.
I'm not saying that's where we want to go. I'm just
No, no,
curious.
No, no.
Well, and then the term booster club was used.
Mhm.
Do we have a policy that we don't allow booster clubs?
Well,
Well,
Do we have booster
what's the
clubs?
Blue Wave
I'm sorry,
booster?
Blue Wave booster is,
Yeah.
but that's broad. I'm sorry, let me reframe it. Sports specific booster. I
mean,
look
like
at,
Friday Night Lights.
I look at New Canaan football, and they got a massive booster program. something that we don't have in this town. So I guess from a policy perspective, do we allow booster clubs to subsidize single sports?
I mean, in terms of, we have the BOE Booster Club that subsidizes sports. It's nice to have, they make requested teams. You see those donations here and you accept them. Sport, you know, we have parents that fundraise, you know, and help support their kids in those outside areas that are nice to have for, you know, to enhance their programs.
So do we have a policy though? Do you guys know? Okay, so it's more of a practice that we've never had single sports booster clubs, although we do also approve gifts from youth organizations, which kind of, for some of those nice to haves, which sometimes benefit both organizations, right? If it's a piece of training equipment out in the field and that sort of thing, or, okay, so that was one of my questions. Keep going,
So
sorry.
that brings up a question to me about, do we want to think about, and I know there's going to be pushback on this, do we want to think about limiting the fundraising like we do at the elementary schools? Like the elementary schools have a cap that the PTOs can only spend X. I don't know what the X is currently, but you know, they're not allowed to spend over. Is that something that, you know, we talk about this, I'm gonna use the word, the equity piece among sports? Is that something that could help that out? I don't know.
That's some at the board level.
Right, no,
Okay.
it's just a question that keeps coming up when I read this, so.
And you know what? Okay. So that, again, let's keep noting these questions at the board level and whether or not the board wants to entertain those questions. Any other questions? Go.
I would just echo, I have a lot of questions, but they're more to the conversation for next time with the full board. You know, what is the goal? Where's the money go? Those kind of things. And then I would just echo that this is helpful background information. So thanks for walking through, you know, the things like the 70-30.
Okay. Denny, any questions?
Yeah, I would echo what Sarah and Katie are saying is I think we need the goal, but what I would also like is, and I hope it's not a lot of work, is just a simple illustration of how much money we're talking about. And I would kind of just choose an easy number of $100 and say, how many athletes do we have and what type of revenue are we talking about?
Yeah, we have
Don't
that.
you do that at $200?
Yeah, so I do it at the 200.
Yeah,
So
that-
like if you did the flat 200, you raised 331. So obviously it was 100, you know, cut that in half.
So Denny, it's not
I
that
missed that,
clear
man.
because it looks like it's actually what we're doing now, but it's a hypothetical.
Okay,
Those following pages, and then same with the clubs and councils, you kind of did that as well. So, you know, it actually, you know, just for the public, I mean, documents out there,
Yeah.
some decent money. I mean, we're talking about. And I think, you know, the question, at least, again, we'll take it to the board, but that's because it's decent money, it deserved the discussion. And because it's practiced in other districts, it deserved the discussion. Okay.
That's another quick question of Chris about the
Yeah, go
voluntary fees. How are those voluntary fees decided? And, you know, I'm just looking at cross country and they're different between the boys and the girls. It's the parents, the coach.
It's a
captain's
conversation
parents
between the
decide?
captains, parents and the coaches about what the needs are going to be for that team. So
Okay,
every team.
so
has
that could
different needs.
change year to year
It could.
depending on the parents involved.
Good, depending what the needs are. of the team.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? Because I have a bunch. Okay, so swimming and dive. We don't have a pool. You mentioned that we don't have a facility share fee. Just, I mean, divers is clear. A facility is going to be a lot for, I believe it's a pretty small team. But so the parents pay no facilities fee in swimming or dive?
Not to rent the facility. So for swimming, we use the Y because we have the reciprocal
Right.
agreement, but we do not dive at the Y, so it's not permitted at the Y. So they do have a rental for dive.
Yeah, so a number of years ago, the Y deemed that their pool depth was not suitable and unsafe for diving.
Yep.
And so we dive, compete, practice at the Mukina Y, which comes at a cost. And so we bus our divers, boys and girls, to the Mukina Y every day after school.
Okay, so if you could just calculate the facilities fee, I mean, I know we have a reciprocal, but there's a way to calculate the
So
fee.
I mean, if we had the same 70-30 split for dive, it would be over $2,000 per person.
Okay, yeah, but if you could just provide that for the next discussion.
So it is in
Oh, it
the,
is?
it's in option 2, you'll see in the rental. fee.
And what about swimming? Same thing?
So, well, swimming, no, just because we have.
Okay,
reciprocal.
so can you calculate what the equivalent would be for the reciprocal agreement?
but
and-
John, question for you with that. So this is something which is always, but the dive team is not a dive team. It's
Right.
part of the swim and dive team.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
like, it's like the track and field, right? It's like saying, the shot put has to pay extra for, because you're doing a field event, or the javelin. The
Yes.
dive is just an event in swimming.
So, pardon the pun, so can we pool those two together and just come to a, and again, this is for information purposes, but it is a off-campus facility that I just like to see it together. Okay, thanks, Dennis, that was helpful.
Yep.
Also, so if you go to the grid that you give us and you give us total costs excluding rentals, right? So these are operating costs. Total operating, including the nice to haves, or just?
No, just what the Board of Ed.
Okay, so just the field, okay. Can you
So
also?
we did on, if you could see this item, you'll see the total cost, the cost per student, and then we have what the student activity contribution is, which is really like those nice to haves and fundraising.
I'm sorry, where do we go?
This.
Yep.
this one. One has 1736 total students at the bottom.
Clubs.
It's the third spreadsheet.
Sorry, the third grid.
Yep.
1, 2, 3.
Total costs excluding rentals.
And then you see cost per student and then activity contribution. So those are kind
Oh.
of nice to have. An adjusted total,
Perfect.
and then the cost per student with the activity.
Is
All right.
that activity contribution, that's parent fee, voluntary fees, that's the booster club donations, that's everything
It's anything that
together.
goes into the student activity.
Okay.
Oh,
It
that's
is
great.
just through, I will just say it is just through May. So obviously anything that got given in June is not captured.
Okay, it's 11/12 of the year. Not much is happening in June. Can you also list the revenues? I think there's only a few sports that we collect revenues on, but gate receipts or anything else.
Sorry, just one more question.
Go
about
ahead.
Activity contribution. A couple of the sports have nothing listed, but I thought that you said that the voluntary fees are part of that. So like, for example, for cross country, there's nothing in activity contribution.
Might be because it was all spent down. So it was like a net to zero, but we can take
So this number, that this column is what's left over?
to at that snapshot in time.
Okay,
Yeah.
so not necessarily comprehensive of what was spent, what was generated. Because that would be helpful.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I
perfect.
think it would be, to have the total that was
Sure.
put into
What
the
are we
pot.
spending
Yeah.
for these
Yeah.
teams? Yeah.
Yeah, like in the past, football didn't have a participation fee, but there's a big fundraiser,
Right.
party.
Right,
But
yep.
although I'm told maybe you're going the voluntary participation fee. Okay. The other one I had, I think you have some listings for like the Middlesex performing arts and that sort of thing.
Yep.
How much of that, like, I guess in that case, some of that's curriculum oriented versus,
So anything that's considered like a club and council is what's in the next thing in the club fee. And then we also show what intramurals are.
okay, so in this case, this is not the performances that are held as part of the curriculum. This is
So
above
that
and
was
beyond.
my question. So in here, it is listed, like the music concerts, band, chorus, orchestra, as well as the entire
So we
music
do
clubs and
list those as
councils,
clubs and councils under music.
but they're curricular.
Correct.
So they shouldn't be charged a fee because you have to participate in the concert in order
Right,
to
so the
complete
fee
the
is
class.
obviously up to the,
Okay, so that would be.
If it would up to me, I would take that out because that's.
Yeah,
curricular.
could you? Yeah, that would be, that's where I was kind of going with that.
Yeah.
Just I took some notes on my phone too.
The intramural list on the back, I have never heard of some of these and I'm like, do they actually exist? Are they running? They're like wiffle ball and team handball, mat ball, like, does that,
At the middle school?
yeah, like anywhere, does it exist in
What
district?
school is it though? It's not.
it's
like-
middle school.
These are all middle school?
Yeah.
So the middle school has a flag football?
It's
Is that-
intramural.
Does it run?
Oh, yeah.
But is that the one through Overton Athletics or?
Nope.
is this the
No,
middle
this would be
school
through
one?
our,
School district.
or district intramural program.
So none of these like volleyball that's not in conjunction with the program, the Y runs, these are all middle school intramurals?
Yes.
So a staff member is able
So in
to run some
RC
of these
11, you'll
programs.
actually see Middlesex intramurals, and it's about a $40,000 budget. And those are like the advisors from those.
How are these communicated? I don't know that.
You'll have to ask.
What was the question?
You'll have to ask the communications committee.
I
No,
mean,
joking.
I've had 2 middle schools. I've never heard of some of
Yeah.
these. Like,
I mean, they have an intramural program after school. These are the activities that they offer, so.
Doesn't need to pay attention. Just, I'm joking. It's totally
Okay,
joking.
Mr. C.
Totally joking. Okay, I think my questions have been answered. I know, again, this is gonna spark a heck of a lot more. So if you could just embellish that for the board discussion. I'm just trying to think, are we missing anything?
So that's currently scheduled for the board retreat.
Yeah, perfect. So that gives you enough time. I mean, that's not too time consuming what we asked you. Chris, do you have any comments on this or any views?
I have an opinion.
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
You know, I do worry that if the decision is made to go with pay to participate, I do worry about how that would impact kids. And you know, we have a lot of kids that participate in sports here because they want to be a part of something. And I worry that if the decision is made to have a fee, a mandatory fee, that we would be limiting the ability for those kids to participate in something that they like to participate in, just for the mere fact that they want to be a part of something and feel connected, and how that would affect their mental health. So that's my opinion.
Oh, it's a great one. And
Yeah,
it's
I
something.
just worry that could be a byproduct of this.
So, you know, I had written that, and again, this is part of the bigger picture discussion, but, you know, my thought process would be, you know, if we were to embark on this, take the lowest and almost call it voluntary or add it to the voluntary fees or something, and have a very, 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 very liberal subsidy program or scholarship program behind it. But again, we're getting into some of the policy discussions, but that is not the intent where we're going. I think we're going to take this. I mean, go ahead.
Would you feel better if it was rolled in a participation fee and there was no donational fee? Like, because there's something being paid at the moment anyway, regardless. So
Yeah, right. I mean, I think I'd feel a little better. I just, again, we have a lot of kids that participate in sports because they just want to feel connected. That's the message that we give to kids coming into 9th grade, like get involved in something during high school. So there's a lot, and it's great for a lot of kids to feel, you know, to go to those pasta dinners and wear their team shirt on game day. And so didn't want to lose that connection a lot of kids have with our athletic programs.
No, I would love you to share that. I mean, you're
Yeah.
sharing it now with us, but continue to share that
Sure.
view
How
too.
many athletes do 3 sports a year?
I don't have a number off the top of my head. We have some, you know, we have a lot of kids that will do cross country, indoor and outdoor track for sure. It's probably not as many as it was maybe 15 or 20 years ago, but we have to do a lot of
Yeah,
three
Just
sport
think about that
athletes, yeah.
family cap option, like
Yeah.
how many families would be affected if they.
Just a quick question on, and maybe this is for both of you. In that,
Mike,
oh, thank you, sorry. In that kind of scenario, using the cross-country indoor track, and with those fees, generally, they would be the same across the board, except for that one where you said a percentage, right? Like, I'm just thinking indoor track, for example, is a bit more casual than some of the other sports, right? Where a lot of times there's less meets, whatever, but that
So
would
the way
still
it
be
works,
the
so the way it
flat.
works in the other communities, it is, you pay, let's say $100, whether it's track or football or basketball or
Whatever
soccer,
you
whatever
join.
it is.
Okay,
But you could obviously create, if you were to do a fee, you could create an structure.
got it. And then John, I just had one other question. about
Please,
clubs. Okay.
this is what we're here for.
Thank you. Just going back to the middle school clubs and councils, I know that there's at least one club that's new this year that's not on this list. But I also remember that some of the clubs have a structure where they have to exist for a couple of years. So is that, would that,
Correct,
okay,
yeah. So it's anything that we pay like an advisor stipend to it.
okay, got it. And that usually happens in year 2 or year
I think it's
3?
year 3.
Okay, thank you.
No, I think, you know, you mentioned the family cap, and alongside, if we were to pursue something like this, I think we'd have a pretty low family cap too. Again, something we can discuss, but to Chris's point, I haven't asked your opinion either yet, but, I think we take pride in the community collaboration that the students get and all these extracurriculars. So we certainly don't want to, put a stipend on that, if you will.
I tend to be a believer that it's a free and public education personally, right? So I go from there to having a stake in the game here. And it's not unusual. I've certainly been from areas from the Hartford area to down here. There's school districts. I would say the preponderance of what I'm used to is there is a standard fee. People have morphed to that to call it participation fee, but it doesn't be accompanied with a contribution fee as well. That has been sort of my experience, so to speak, primarily. It's a bit different here in that context, so everything is contextual. I've rationalized over the years. I used to be like a free and public education, even though athletics is extracurricular in nature, would be a nice thing. But I think the idea of a flat fee or some sort of flat fee with limits and family limits and stuff I think it's reasonable, and that just goes to offset the actual full budget, basically.
And look, I mean, you've seen it over the year. How many years have you been doing this?
I just finished year 10.
Okay, so here,
Oh,
but
17 total. 10
yeah,
Darien.
so, I mean, you can comment on how the bar has been raised in terms of some of the tools, if we will, or, that the sports are using versus 17 years ago. I mean, huddle didn't exist, right? I mean, it's a perfect example.
It's like a small college. I mean, a lot of the athletic programs are like, it's small college, stuff in terms of facilities and technology.
I should say, actually, just to finish my comment, that what accompanied the flat fee, what's not unusual for fundraisers and so on and so forth to be done.
Right. I laugh. I mean, car washes are one thing, but some of these fundraisers, I've been to several of them across several sports, and it raised in this town have the potential to raise decent money. And okay, go ahead.
Well, the only thing I would say is that invariably when we get to the board level, it'd be nice to come to some consensus in this, and it doesn't become an annual. That's
exactly what we're trying to clean up, if you will, because it keeps coming up.
Just one last question, or I don't know if it's the last question, but another question for me. So in the memo, Rich, you or Chris, you wrote that the non-CIAC sports we're the only district that funds that without parent, we're the only district that funds that somewhat. So to me, I think, it begs the question is, how do we, and maybe again, larger philosophical discussion, but how do we define what is a sport and what is a club, or what is, because to me, if it's not, I'm just throwing something out there. If it's not sanctioned by the CIAC, do we call it a sport, or is it a club, or is it something else? And how do the other districts, I guess, how do they parse that somehow?
We're not the only district that supports through the budget.
Okay, I thought it said in the memo that we were, sorry.
So the comparison was really to New Canaan. So New Canaan's
Right.
policy is if it's a non-CIC, FCIC sport, the board doesn't contribute anything. And so there's parent fundraisers, and there's, voluntary fees that are collected, booster clubs that are collected, and then that money is given to the board to pay for the coach and the materials and whatever it might be for those sports.
So that's where New Canaan drew its line.
Okay, no, but honestly, I think for me, it's, you could theoretically debate that, the robotics club is a sport because you have competitions and you have practices, you work towards something, and then you have a competition. And just like, sailing, you have a competition in sailing. So how do we define,
right?
How do we define what is a sport and what is a club? To me, I think we kind of have to parse that out somehow.
But you had I guess maybe Chris, rugby I'd experienced for the first time this year. That's considered a varsity sport, but it's not CIAC sanctioned, but don't they have a state championship set up, or
They have a Connecticut, a lot of the non-CIAC, non-FCX sports do have some kind of a, state body that kind of oversees it, rugby being example. So they do have a Division I, Division II structure to it.
Okay, so the CIAC just has chosen not to get involved in some of these sports.
Right, CIC, unless there's a certain number of schools that offer that sport, they wouldn't necessarily get involved.
Okay, have you seen that creep up over the years?
In rugby or
In any sport, like
it's
adopting?
creeping up in girls hockey. So girls hockey is not technically a CIC sanctioned
Yeah.
sport, but it is an FCIAC recognized sport.
Yeah, so it's a great example.
And there is a state body that organizes the state playoffs and it's, looked at as a state championship for girls hockey. So, and that number has increased, over the last few years in terms of offerings throughout the state.
Do all the other FCS schools have sailing, squash, rugby, whatever? No?
No.
Be tough to be up in like Danbury to have, well, no, actually Candlewood Lake. I don't know if they do, but
Yeah, no.
So I would just say in this conversation that I think the report that we're expecting from SEAC will be really helpful in some of these conversations specific about sports and about those things. But that as we come back to the board table, I would just say that Chris's comments, I would hope would remain at the forefront of our conversation, which is really about the culture of Darien. We're really fortunate that we have some incredible athletes that really excel. But we also have a number of athletes. And I think you're exactly right about the opportunity of kids being able to feel connected to the school. Young kids coming in at 14 and suddenly now having a relationship with upperclassmen. Those are opportunities that are just really invaluable. So thank you for those comments.
yeah, and we'll have you back so you can make them again. At the board level anyway, or.
And with that, John, I think it's something else that we should probably discuss or have put out there, that the Darien Board of Education a number of years ago voted to implement participation fees during, I believe, the special education crisis, and they were short on budget funds, so they implemented this to be a way to collect fees to make up for the budget loss. But then, to Dr. Adley's point, the board then said that the free and public education should include sports, and they voted it down or rescinded the participation fee after I believe 2 years. So
Yeah,
just to be clear that we did do this at one point, and the board voted against it. Against doing it. So
Were you here for that, Chris, that period?
I was here certainly during the special education.
But I thought it was
Right.
2008, more
Oh, then I
financial
wasn't- I started-
crisis related.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
remember when it was, but yeah,
Yeah.
I remember we did this. though,
Yeah, I don't
so-
want to tie that to.
But you
the
haven't been
special
here
ed
when
thing.
there's been fees charged?
No,
Okay.
never.
So you weren't here. So it's
I
more
started in
than-
2013 here. And I,
So it's
Yeah, so
longer
it's
than-
before that, Denny. It was, I
Okay.
think it was tied to the financial crisis and the economic.
But it was definitely for a
pressures.
budget shortfall. you
Yes,
know, and-
yeah. It wasn't, I just want to set the record. It wasn't
Yep,
tied.
fair.
Okay, so with that, I think got a lot of good questions, but mostly the clarifying questions that you can bring. Is that CIC report going to be completed before retreat day?
That's the intent. I say that we just have to we're getting the status of it this week, so, but that's the intent.
Okay, I mean, it's almost like we shouldn't do it without that report.
Right.
But, I mean, I'll let you deal with our executives. Sorry. Okay, public comment?
Good morning, anyone in person? If anyone online would like to participate, please use the raised hand icon. There are no raised hands at this time.
Well, thank you for the robust conversation. Thanks for joining us, Chris. And everybody have a great day. Motion to adjourn.